Good evening to you both. And let's begin with Donald Trump's global tariff war. Here's what Mark Carney had to say this morning in his role as Prime Minister.
As I told President Trump during our call last week, Canada will respond to the U.S. auto tariffs. And today I'm announcing that the Government of Canada will be responding by matching the U.S. approach, with 25% tariffs on all vehicles imported from the United States that are not compliant with CUSMA, our North American Free Trade Agreement.
Mark Carney, who has paused his campaign as Liberal leader, responded this morning to sweeping U.S. reciprocal tariffs triggered against several nations by U.S. President Donald Trump Wednesday. And while Canada was not on the list, previously imposed tariffs on vehicles, auto parts, steel, and aluminum remain. Marg, I'll start with you. Mark Carney, in his comments today, also saying the U.S. levying tariffs will rupture the global economy, torpedo economic growth. What do you take away from the degree to which Canada is hitting back?
Well, he's right about global reaction. You just have to look at the stock markets today to see what's happening. I think he's taking a pretty measured and careful approach, which probably is what needs to be done. You know, yesterday there's a few people taking victory laps that we weren't on the list, but, you know, there's at least 3,500 people today who aren't working because of that move yesterday. So I think it's caution ahead. And, you know, I like the measured approach right now and see where it goes.
Yeah, 3,500 Stellantis employees temporarily laid off, we understand, for at least a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Sarah, with Canada being excluded from the reciprocal tariffs, what kind of light do you think that might shed on Mark Carney's phone conversation with President Trump last week?
I'm not sure if we can read too much into it. I think, you know, the biggest indicators were what we heard initially in Trump actually calling Mark Carney the Prime Minister of Canada and addressing him with what I would call the, you know, the most basic amount of respect to someone in that position. But maybe I'm going to be the odd person out on this, but I wish we had actually been a little bit more measured in our approach to putting retaliatory tariffs back in place. I kind of feel like, you know, we might be pushing our luck a little bit. And so being even more measured, I think, and taking a wait and see approach to this. It's unfortunate and unbelievable that we're even in this position. But Trump is so unpredictable. And I think that by playing it even more cautious, we might be protecting our best interests more, but we'll have to see how this plays.
Mark, given that Trump unpredictability, and of course, all the uncertainty and anxiety shared by Canadians the past several weeks, where do you think Wednesday's developments leave Canada-U.S. relations now, trade or otherwise?
You know, I think last week, Prime Minister Carney said, you know, the current relationship we have is done. And I think he's right. There's certainly been a lot of trust lost. And I don't think we're going to see that trust resume in the next while. I guess we'll have to work and create a new relationship, but at the same time, as many people are saying, we need to create relationships with others and not be so dependent on the states, something which we've talked about for years and have never done. So I think the impetus is here now to do both.
Sarah, Premier Smith posted a statement to social media Wednesday with an image declaring big win for Alberta and Canada. What do you make of that message? How do you feel Alberta fares here?
I think that was not a good look coming from the Premier. I think it's really unfortunate, as we had already mentioned, that there are thousands of workers out of their job, even if it's temporary. If those jobs were Albertan jobs, Premier Smith would be singing a different tune. And so I think that her declaration of victory is really regrettable. Kind of harkens back to me when George Bush was on the deck of a U.S. air carrier declaring victory. And obviously that wasn't the case. And these are two very different scenarios. And but it's just, you know, it's just a step too far, too fast, in my opinion. And so I just don't think that's the best look for her. Again, I think the best approach to all of this would just to be take it slow But I am really concerned about Premier Smith wanting to liaise with Quebec Premier Francis Legault on how our two provinces can be more aligned in our approach to the federal government. Because if we are following the lead of a province or a party that is dedicated to separating from Canada, then I think that that's something that we need to opt out.
Mark, where do you see the conversation going now with the premiers, with the provinces, and how do you see Alberta factoring into that dialogue under the umbrella of an election?
Well, I think I'd be curious to see more about what the meeting today, but I think we're going to continue to be an outlier amongst the premiers with those statements like yesterday. And I totally agree with Sarah. I think it's way premature to take a victory lap, especially when there's any Canadians affected by these trade tariffs. And so, yeah, I am disturbed by the talk of a conversation with Quebec, and I'm disturbed that we, as Albertans, or our premier, thinks first of Alberta without considering the rest of Canada when she says she's on Team Canada. So totally agree with Sarah. It's not a good look, and I worry for what's going to come next from our premier.
And Sarah, how does any of this end up playing politically where the federal election is concerned? How might it change election dynamics?
I don't think it can really change much, Michael, just because Danielle Smith has been so vocal in her support of Pierre Poilievre, which in itself is really unusual for a premier to take such a, direct position in supporting one party leader over any other. But it makes things more difficult, I think, for Pierre Poilievre. It makes it easier, actually, for the federal Liberals. But what I care about most is how this impacts Albertans. And I don't think that Danielle Smith's positions on any of these issues do any favors or align with the views of a majority of Albertans. She's putting herself out on a limb and to her own disadvantage.
And Marg, maybe last word to you. Many of the recent polls have been putting the Liberals ahead of the Conservatives. In some cases as much as 9 percentage points, given the tariff developments. How much of a window of opportunity do you see opening for Pierre Poilievre to maybe begin clawing back some support?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think he had a really good speech today, or good, not really good, but good. Talking about the tariffs, and then he at the end ended up talking about John A. Macdonald and bringing back the statue in wherever he was today.
I believe it was Hamilton.
I was going to say Hamilton, but I didn't want to guess wrong. But so you could think two things from that. He's speaking to his own, or he's trying to get keep his own supporters included. And it didn't feel like a speech where he was trying to reach out to others. And I think that was a mistake for him. But yeah, he's got to look at those polls and try to do something different. And it looked like today he was. I have to give him that.
Okay, development today on the labor front that will make Alberta nurses the highest paid in any province. The United Nurses of Alberta reporting its members have voted nearly 96% in favor of ratifying a new 4-year collective agreement with groups that include AHS, Recovery Alberta, Primary Care Alberta, and Covenant Health. Pay increases said to be approximately 20% over the life of the agreement, along with what the UNA describing as significant increases in premium pay and other benefits. In a statement, Finance Minister Nate Horner calls it a fair and equitable settlement that balances government's ability to continue to invest in healthcare and provide fair and market-based compensation for nurses. Sarah, I'll start with you this time. First, what do you think this deal reflects? Given it was last October, UNA members voted against a settlement recommended by a mediator.
Well, obviously, 96% favor and support is an overwhelming yes for any ratification agreement. So I think the nurses will be happy with obviously being the highest paid in Canada, and the UCP will be the happiest political party to say that the nurses in Alberta are the highest paid in Canada. What this won't take away is, I think, any of the other elements to what we're dealing with in healthcare in Alberta, which is wait times, overcrowded emergency rooms, hallway medicine, and all of those things. So while I'm happy for the nurses and I'm happy that the UCP can call this a win, I guess, I'm not happy with the status of healthcare in Alberta, which has not been impacted and will not change a single thing with this deal.
Mark, having been in government, what strikes you about the deal that has been reached, and maybe what it took to get to this point with the Smith government?
Yeah, I found it interesting that they settled quickly when it seems like, for a long time, the nurses have been disrespected and, told they make enough already and that. So something's happened along the way. But I think maybe this government has realized that there's competition from all provinces and indeed probably the U.S. for nurses to go and they can walk if they don't like the deal in Alberta. So I'm happy for the nurses. I agree with Sarah, there's much more to be done. But I do see there's a little clause in there about working in rural Alberta, and I'm curious about that because as somebody who's lived in rural Alberta most of my adult life, I know that there has not been an equal playing field, and it's been hard to recruit nurses. So if this deal helps them in rural Alberta, it's a good start.
Sarah, you talked about the state of healthcare a moment ago. What might this say about stability as the Smith government continues the considerable restructuring of the healthcare system, rolls out new public sector agencies?
Well, I think I'm like every other Albertan, Michael and Marg, and in that I'm still waiting to see these dramatic changes affect the state of care for Albertans in our hospitals and doctors' offices. Like nothing has changed. We haven't seen the increased better of anything so far, and that the UCP and Danielle Smith isn't talking a lot about healthcare right now. Obviously, the world is focusing on Trump and tariffs. But I do think it's interesting that the UCP is focusing more and lasering in on the aspect of rural everything. And what does rural mean to the UCP? It means vote. I think that targeting rural specific issues is about locking up and telling rural voters in Alberta that we're working really hard on behalf of you. And this is a message that I think we'll continue to see increased amount of time given to by Danielle Smith and her ministers.
Marg, messages in this agreement here for other public sector unions, maybe engaged in bargaining, engaged in negotiations with the Smith government?
Oh, I would think yes. The next group is probably LPNs when you're talking healthcare. And I don't know the other groups, the X-ray people and that, where they're at. But yeah, it signals that they're willing to do some bargaining and it set the bar. I agree with Sarah. I think this is probably the impetus was they're getting heat from rural Alberta because there's so many ERs shut down there and they're not getting the service that they should. And this is a problem that's been going for years and years and years. And it isn't going to be fixed in 90 days, as was promised earlier by our premier.
Sarah, we heard from Dr. Ritesh Rem, President of Rural Medicine for the Alberta Medical Association, off of the top of the program tonight. What did you take away from his messaging around sustainability of healthcare in rural Alberta?
Well, I think again, it's that newfound focus on everything rural. Even in Minister Horner's statement heralding the success of negotiating with the nurses, it was rural, rural, rural. So the UCP is really good at politics most of the time. I'll say the UCP is really good at politics most of the time, and they understand where their voter base. And so by focusing on issues that directly impact the people that will potentially determine the outcome of the next provincial election is in their best interest. And so, hearing the doctor's comments about, how that the funding will improve quality of care in rural practices is right on in terms of what I think the UCP is doing politically. But again, I think that where people will really, where it will really matter is when, you know, those ER wait times, those ER closures, you can have a brand new machine and a nurse on call. Is there a bed? Is the emergency room even open to receive you? We'll have to see how that works.
All right. We'll have to leave it there. Good to hear from you both. Thank you kindly.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.